Hello friends, as we discussed, competency based education is an outcome based approach to teaching learning process. For the success of CBE, proper framing of the learning outcomes is necessary because they bring clarity, precision and transparency in designing our teaching learning process. In this video, we will know in details about learning outcomes, how it is different from learning objectives and what are the characteristics of writing smart learning outcomes. So, learning outcomes are declarations that portray significant and essential learning that has been achieved by learners and that can be reliably demonstrated at the end of the learning. Learning outcomes are observable, measurable, and specific statements of what the student is expected to achieve and how he or she is expected to demonstrate that achievement. So, learning outcomes are statement of what a student will be able to do or demonstrate at the completion of a certain sequence of learning. It is mainly concerned with the achievements of the learner and less with the intentions of the teacher. Sometimes we got confused about learning objectives and learning outcomes. Learning objectives describe the expected goal of a curriculum, whereas learning outcomes are the outcomes of learning that can be demonstrated by the learner at the end of the learning process. Learning objectives are viewed from the teacher's perspective, whereas learning outcomes are viewed from the learner's perspective. For example, one of the learning objectives for middle stage mathematics learner is learners are expected to collect, represent and interpret simple data from her or his context and use it in everyday life. To achieve this objective, a teacher has to write learning outcomes like learners will be able to collect records and interpret simple information by looking at visuals, draws inference based on the data collected, records data using tally marks, represents pictorially and draws conclusions, etc. Now let us know how to write learning outcomes. A teacher should be able to adapt the learning outcomes prepared by NCERT as it is. In the year 2017, NCERT published learning outcomes at elementary stage. In the year 2019, learning outcomes at the secondary stage and higher secondary stage. We can directly adapt the learning outcomes prepared by NCERT as it is. Or we can adapt the learning outcomes prepared by NCERT for the topic at hand, or we can create learning outcomes by our own. To create learning outcomes by our own, we have to know the anatomy of constructing learning outcomes along with its characteristics. But let us discuss the anatomy of learning outcome statement. Each learning outcome statement should have two main components. The first one is an action word that identifies the performance to be demonstrated. And the second one is a learning statement that specifies what learning will be demonstrated in the performance. For example, suppose a learning outcome statement is students will be able to apply the concept of quadratic equations in real life situations. Here, the word apply is the action word and the learning statement is concept of quadratic equations. Let us consider another example. Students will be able to identify trigonometric functions from its graph. Here, the action word is identify and the learning statement is trigonometric functions. The characteristics of learning outcomes are the learning outcome statement should be specific and well defined. It should be realistic, should rely on active verbs, should align with the curriculum goals of the program in which they are taught, should be simple and not compound, should focus on learning products and not the learning process. So, our learning outcomes should be SMART, means specific, measurable, attainable, relevant and timely. Here we have two statements. We have to identify which statement looks more like an learning outcome. The first statement is students will be able to understand how a computer works, and the second statement is students will be able to operate a computer. The second statement is a smart learning outcome because it is skill oriented As we discussed earlier, learning outcomes are observable and measurable statements. The action word used in the first statement is understand, which is not measurable. We will not able to know whether a child understand or not. But when a child operate a computer, we will be able to assess the child and implement possible interventions if required. So, the verbs like understand, enjoy, perceive, realize, know, be aware of should be avoided while writing smart learning outcomes. Here are few action words or smart verbs for all the three domains of learning, which are observable and measurable. While writing learning outcome statement, we may use these action words. Friends, thank you very much for watching this video. In the next video, we'll discuss on test and its characteristics. Thank you very much.